Where are we? Well, we're still with Moses and the thousands and thousands of Hebrews, also called Israelites. Not just Hebrews though, there were others that believed God and left Egypt with them. Maybe there were some Egyptians. Maybe there were other people who had moved to Egypt from other places, like the Hebrews had before, and then they were made slaves by the Egyptians. We don't know exactly, but we know that other people went with them. Pharaoh refused to let God's people go, and so God sent plagues on Egypt. The final plague, death, eventually, sadly, was the one thing that finally got Pharaoh to let the Hebrews that he was keeping as slaves go. More than that, Pharaoh told them that they had to go. Pharaoh wanted them gone, completely, now. As dawn came, Moses and the Hebrews were on the march. They had food, clothes, and all kinds of other things that the Egyptians had given them to get them gone. For a bunch of slaves, they were now pretty rich, and that caused a problem. You see, there aren't a lot of ways to get out of Egypt. Egypt has a whole lot of sand, but just on the edge of Egypt, it's all water. But there's a nice little straight route over the top. One problem. That area was full of a rather unfriendly group of people called the Philistines. You may have heard about them when we were talking about King David and other stories. Well, a group of tired Hebrews on the march with a load of gold and silver, that makes them a pretty good target to be robbed, even if there are thousands of them. God didn't want his people in a fight. He wanted them out of Egypt. So, if the route out of Egypt was closed at the top, then where were they going to go? The Israelites didn't have a map, they didn't have GPS, but what they did have was fire and cloud. Yep, you heard that right. God became their compass, and he put a pillar of fire to guide them at night and a pillar of cloud to guide them in the day, and that led them south, towards the water. The people camped near the Red Sea, a big old piece of water of over 3 miles across, even at the narrowest point. They didn't know exactly what was happening or what would happen next, but they were free. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, Pharaoh was angry. He could feel the way that people were talking about him. Pharaoh was meant to be a god, but he couldn't protect his own family or the families of the people of Egypt. He was humiliated, and that made him angry. But he had an idea. Pharaoh knew that the people hadn't gone north through the land of the Philistines. That meant one thing to him. The Israelites were cornered. No way out to the north, no way out to the south, and only the massive expanse of water that is the Red Sea in front of them. They were trapped. Pharaoh sent every chariot he had to chase them down, and there was only one thing that he had in mind when he caught them: revenge. Pharaoh was going to kill every last one of those Hebrews. Every single one. The chariots drove across the desert towards where the Israelites were camped. The dust from the desert rose up like a cloud behind them as they rose. The Israelites saw that cloud of dust. They knew what was coming. They were afraid. They came to Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt just to die in the wilderness?" But Moses told them, "Don't worry. God didn't bring you out of Egypt to be caught by the Egyptian army in the desert. God will save us all today, and we will never see the Egyptians again." God told Moses to get the people moving, have them walk towards the Red Sea. As the chariots of Pharaoh got closer and closer, God moved his pillar of cloud behind the people of Israel. The cloud stopped the chariots from seeing which way they were going. They went the wrong way. They slowed down. They got back on track. They went the wrong way again. All night the Hebrews kept walking towards the Red Sea, and all night God confused the Egyptian army and kept them away. Eventually the people stopped. There was nowhere else to go. In front of them was water, nothing but water, miles of it, to the left, to the right, and in front of them and behind them, the Egyptian army, and soon they would be closing in. Why would God do this? Had God led them to a dead end? Were they really trapped? No, God had a plan. He'd already told Moses, and now it was time for God to do something absolutely amazing. God had told Moses that when he got to the Red Sea, he was to lift up his walking stick and hold it out over the sea. The sea would part, and the children of Israel would go through the middle of the sea on dry land. Moses held his walking stick out over the sea and stretched out his arm. And as he did, a wind started to blow. Not just the kind of wind that would turn an umbrella inside out. Not the kind of wind that made trees sway. This was the kind of wind that moved water. Lots of water. Lots and lots of water. The wind blew and the Red Sea split in half. The water rose up on one side and the other, and down the middle, dry land. Just like God had promised, the children of Israel started walking again, over 3 miles across, and the thousands and thousands of Israelites walked it, with the water piled up on either side. But there's something missing from our story. What happened to those Egyptian chariots? Well, they were catching up. They were amazed at what they saw, but they also saw the people of Israel, and they were getting away. The chariots rushed in behind the people of Israel. The Israelites had a good head start. They'd been making their way across the Red Sea for hours. But now the chariots could see them. And they were catching up. And they weren't going to let them get away. But something was changing. As the chariots, all 600 of them, got into the dry land in the middle of the sea, the water started to change. The wind wasn't as strong. The water wasn't being held as strongly. Suddenly, the wind stopped. The chariot drivers looked up, and the walls of water collapsed. The chariots had nowhere to go. They wanted to trap and kill every Israelite, but God wouldn't let that happen, and instead, he showed Pharaoh who was more powerful. Again, God had power over all of creation. Today, that power saved the Israelites, and every Egyptian who tried to kill the Hebrews died. When the children of Israel saw all that had happened, they had more fear and respect and worship for God than ever before. Truly, this was God who was leading them. And Moses and the children of Israel sang to God. And Moses, directed by God, led the children of Israel out into the wilderness. And we'll catch up with them next time. Once again, God had proved he was the only God. When the children of Israel were stuck between a massive army and a massive sea with nowhere left to turn, God led them. Sometimes we can feel like life is too much, like we don't have a choice, like we're trapped and alone. Often we can feel trapped by the bad choices that we make, but God is always there. Just as with the children of Israel, God has prepared a way for us. Whilst we're unable to fix our own problems of wrongdoing, God has prepared a way by sending his Son, Jesus, to take the punishment for us and to lead us from our sin. All we have to do is accept what he has done for us and to follow him. Once we've put our trust in Jesus, we can continue to find out more from God by reading our Bibles and praying to God. God wants to lead you and me, just like he led Moses and the children of Israel all those years ago. I've trusted in Jesus. Have you? Thank you for listening.